Good afternoon, everyone, or I should say good evening. Maybe there might be some people elsewhere, like Professor Louise Ravelli, which is Tuesday morning, so it could also be good morning. So this is a very kind of mixed time zone event. So thanks to everyone who registered and to everyone who made it some time today to join us at the Federal University of Acre for this event where we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the degree in Letras, which is the study of English language and literature. Então, boa tarde, uma boa tarde, mas também uma boa noite para alguns, um bom dia para aqueles que falam português. Nós agradecemos imensamente a presença de vocês a este evento que nós comemoramos os 50 anos do curso de Letras, um curso que tem trabalhado na formação de professores, de intelectuais em todo o estado do Acre. E esse evento, com 5 palestras, tem como objetivo celebrar essa data, mas também iniciarmos um processo, darmos continuidade a um processo de maior sinergia com universidades de outros locais. So, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of UFAC, we also try to create some more synergy between different researchers around the globe and universities so we can actually work together for the improvement of society. On behalf of the Center of Art, Letters and Education, unfortunately, the Dean could not be here today for family reasons, but I would like to express my gratitude to the Dean for his support for organizing this event. And I would like to invite Professor Carlos Moraes. He's the Vice President for Extension and Culture, which is the office under which this event is being carried out. So I would like to invite him to give us some welcome words. Thank you, Professor Carlos.
Ok. Muito obrigado, professor Francisco. Eu gostaria, primeiramente, de manifestar a satisfação da Pró-Reitoria de Extensão e Cultura de estar neste evento, um evento que tem o apoio da nossa Pró-Reitoria, um evento e também em comemoração dos 50 anos do curso de Letras.
Okay, I would like to first express my gratitude for being invited to this event, and which celebrates the 50th anniversary of the Letters course.
Segundo ponto, eu gostaria de manifestar a importância de eventos dessa natureza, eventos internacionais que utilizam os meios de comunicação virtuais, nas redes, para manifestar essa possibilidade também de fortalecer as nossas parcerias. A pandemia nos deixou também esse legado, que nós acreditamos, a possibilidade de eventos dessa natureza e como é importante para o fortalecimento do processo de internacionalização da nossa universidade.
Okay, I would like also to highlight how important it is that we organize this type of international events that even if virtually, they can strengthen collaboration in terms of research, in terms of education, teaching, which is actually this kind of event, these virtual events, they are only possible now because of the pandemic. And then if we can say that something good comes out of, he didn't say this word, but out of this mess that the pandemic got us in, is that we are now actually much more connected. We have so quickly developed all these tools, and we can make this kind of event a reality, make it happen.
Terceiro ponto, só parabenizar os organizadores por este evento e desejar a todos que terão parte deste evento um ótimo evento, aos nossos alunos, professores do nosso curso, também dando as boas-vindas aos nossos palestrantes das várias universidades que estarão presentes virtualmente neste nosso evento. A nossa gratidão e muito obrigado.
Okay. He would also like to congratulate the organizers of this event. You have the teaching staff, the academic staff, the student helpers who have helped us a lot, especially with the tech. And Viana, he's our tech guy, and he saved us a lot throughout. And he would like to welcome all the speakers during this week and Monday next week, who will be sharing that knowledge and pretty much sort of cutting edge research with us. So thank you very much for accepting this invitation and being part of this virtual festivity and experiment, at least for me. Thank you very much, Professor Carlos. Muito obrigado pela sua participação, por fazer um tempo para estar conosco. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite the president of the university, which is really an honor because we have a woman as president of this university. She's only the second, and we have been pushing boundaries in the last decade. So it's really a pleasure and honor to have the president here with us today to welcome each one of us. Eu gostaria de dar as boas-vindas à reitora, professora Margarida Aquino, professora Guida Aquino. Eu apenas salientei agora o fato de que nós temos uma reitora e que, infelizmente, ainda precisamos lembrar disso em um mundo em que nós estamos aos poucos progredindo, mas ela está fazendo história na nossa universidade. Nós agradecemos pela disponibilidade de estar conosco. A reitora tem a palavra.
Boa tarde, aqui no nosso Acre, a todos e todas. É uma grande alegria fazer parte desse momento, de 50 anos do nosso curso de Língua e Literatura Inglesa, que é um curso que nos orgulha. Queria aqui agradecer e parabenizar todos os organizadores do evento, aqui na pessoa do professor Francisco Veloso, que está aqui conosco, e também saudar todos os palestrantes, em especial a professora Louise Ravelli.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today to join the festivities for the 50th anniversary of the English Language and Literature program. She would like to thank the organizers, each one of us who have worked hard to make this possible, including all the speakers, and Professor Louise Ravelli, who is here today with us.
Muito feliz de ter um evento aqui internacional. Nós temos que tirar alguma coisa de bom dessa pandemia, que eu não sei se é bom, mas tirar que os nossos eventos, nós estamos tendo oportunidade de estar compartilhando com professores de outras universidades, aqui em especial, aqui do curso de inglês, com universidades internacionais, e a nossa universidade precisa dessa interação por ser uma universidade amazônica e também ser uma universidade de fronteira, com Bolívia e Peru.
Okay, so she's very happy to be hosting at this university this international event because, as I mentioned before, the pandemic has given us the opportunity to share knowledge, to hold this kind of event with other universities, not only Brazil, but everywhere in the world, such as this one, with international universities. And because we are a university in the Amazon, which is in a way quite difficult to access, this only boosts the possibilities for more interaction and exchange of knowledge with other universities. Also, because we are in the sort of on the border with Peru and Bolivia, it only makes us more interested in reaching out to other institutions to international institutions.
Para finalizar, gostaria de desejar um excelente debate aí acadêmico sobre os estudos linguísticos, que é o objetivo dessa semana. Parabenizar mais uma vez a todos, agradecer aqui ao professor Francisco pela tradução, que está aqui nos auxiliando, né? Que todos aproveitem aí essa semana, os 50 anos do nosso querido curso de Letras de Língua e Literatura Inglesa. Muito obrigada e bom evento a todos.
And finally, I would like to wish all of us, an excellent academic event during this week. For the next 5 meetings, we have the 5 sessions. She's thanking me for the translation. This is the first time I do it in a long, long time, so this is good to practice. So thank you very much to the president of the university to being here with us. And we look forward to having more of these events, not in the future, but very soon we can meet again in other events. Agradecemos à reitora e ao professor Carlos pelo suporte da universidade para que possamos realizar esse tipo de evento. Esses eventos, e nós esperamos, não digo que no futuro, mas que em breve nós possamos nos encontrar em outros eventos dessa natureza. Alguns já estão no forno. Então, muito obrigado pela presença de vocês. E agora eu vou convidar a professora Louise Ravelli para estar conosco para fazer a palestra. So, I just thanked Professor Carlos and the president for the opportunity, and I was telling them that I'm not looking forward to seeing them in the future, but actually very soon, as we have other events sort of in the oven, in the pipeline. So I hope we will meet soon. So thank you very much. And now I would like to introduce you to our speaker for today. I know you looking forward to hearing from Professor Louise Ravelli. Thanks everyone in the audience who's here with us today. So this is really good. The program in English language and literature was created in 1971, and it has a lot of history. It has given society not only we have nurtured not only teachers, but also people who have served as Secretary of Education at state and city level. We have occupied different positions in society, contributing to the teaching and learning of English. So we have been very busy, and now we have these challenges for the future. What are we going to do with, how are we teaching language in face of new technologies, in face of new ways of communicating that actually change much faster than we as university can catch up with in terms of research, in terms of curriculum. So we need, when we thought about this event, we thought, okay, we want to celebrate this 50th anniversary, but not only look back to the past, but also think, where are we now in terms of language and communication, as highlighted by Professor Carlos and President Guida Aquino. The pandemic has changed the way we do academic events. I was just telling Professor Ravelli that this is, for me, the first experience of a virtual academic event since it all started, and it feels a little bit kind of awkward yet, because I know there are lots of people out there, but I can't see you. So we can reach out to people, but not like before. So we need to make new ways. We will probably stumble on the way of developing these new ways of communicating. So this event is then about, where do we go from now? So what is it? What do we have for the next 50 years, what are the challenges in terms of working with language and communication. So when I invited Professor Louise Ravelli, I was thinking exactly about this process of communication, which is much more complex, with TikTok and their dancing and music that can be annoying but can be fun, but they actually have a huge impact because they are bringing new ways of communicating. And these kids who are actually using TikTok today, about 10 years from now, they will be in our classrooms at university. So what can we wait from them? So we need to catch up with this. So I invited Professor Louise Ravelli because she has been working a lot with multimodality, which is a very recent field. I would say sort of one of the benchmarks for this field is the 2001 book by Gunther Kress and Theo van Leeuwen, Multimodality in Contemporary Society, the Multimedia of Contemporary Society, which is exactly what I'm talking about here, is all these changes in the multimedia of contemporary society. So how can we integrate and think about that in the classroom as well? So Professor Louise Ravelli, she's a professor of communication in the School of the Arts and Media at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, a lovely place. She has a long-standing interest in understanding how language, images, and other modalities, including spatial design, work in communication contexts, using multimodal discourse analysis and systemic functional linguistics. She has published widely in the field, and she has published, for example, a book on multimodality in the built environment, spatial discourse analysis, Ravelli 2016, with Robert McMurtry, Museum Texts Communication Frameworks, Ravelli 2006, and doctoral writing in the Creative and Performing Arts 2014. She's also a joint chief editor of the journal Visual Communication, a journal that has contributed a lot to the development of this field of multimodality and visual communication at large. And she has supervised widely, and currently she's supervising projects in spatial design, web analysis, music, and movement. So perhaps in the future we have Professor Louise Ravelli sharing about, and her students also sharing about all these different topics. So no further ado, I would like to invite Professor Louise Ravelli to talk to us, to share what she has prepared for us today. And thank you very much, Louise, for accepting the invitation. We feel really honored to have you represent the University of New South Wales today. So thank you very, very much. For our audience, you can send questions on the chat as you go. She won't be reading, but we will try to keep track of those. And she will have around 45 minutes to talk. Of course, you can extend a bit. Let's not be so strict with the time. Also because we are doing this new digital thing. And then we will have some time for Q&A, questions and answers. Okay, thank you very much. So, Louise, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Muito obrigada, Francisco, and bom dia a todos. And that is the limit of my Portuguese at the moment. Yes, thank you very much, President Aquino and Vice Dean Moraes, for your kind words, and Francisco for your invitation, and for the whole event. I mean, to celebrate 50 years is significant, and to do so with an event over a whole week with speakers every day, it's really a marvelous contribution to sharing of knowledge. And I'm very honored to be here. And to engage with Brazil again in some way. I first met Francisco in Sao Paulo in 2006. He was a PhD student at the time, working with Zé Luís Moura and Viviane Rebele. And we have managed to stay in touch over the years through his many travels. And I'm pleased to say we were able to work together on the journal Visual Communication, of which we are both very proud. And I do wish I could be with you actually and not virtually, as I've enjoyed my previous visits to Brazil, and I've had the honor of working with Viviane Ebele and Daniele Almeida and Graciela Rabusca Henges, among others. So I feel strong connections in some way to you all. I'm going to share my slides now. And after that, when I share my slides, I can't see you or read the chat. I'm just actually talking to myself. So I have asked Francisco to interrupt if anything goes wrong and tell me, otherwise I won't know. So. Okay, so Francisco, are you able to see the screen now?
Yes, everything is it's working perfectly. Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, so multimodality and English. So what is multimodal English? English is surely about the study of language, be it everyday language, professional communication, or creative forms of communication. Multimodal English is about communication through multimodal texts, of which language is a part. Multimodal English is central to the question of understanding contemporary communication, particularly where digital technologies make such complex forms of texts readily available. The perception that there is truly any monomodal communication is somewhat of a fiction. If language is written, it has a visual presence, whether it is handwritten, printed by a machine, or appearing on screen in the form of pixels. All these differences add further layers of meaning to what is written. If the communication is spoken, it may be loud or soft. It may be in a familiar accent or one which is strange. It may be accompanied by wild gestures or perhaps heard without any visual presence. All of these features add further layers of meaning to the communication taking place. But it is important to recognize that there is a continuum from these inherent forms of multimodality, that is the visual presence of written language and the physical presence of spoken language, to the related phenomena of explicit co-configuration of multiple modes. So a printed book, which has no pictures at all, is still multimodal, as the font, paper, ink, colour and layout and binding all contribute to socially and culturally understood meanings. The multimodality is a little more obvious if the printed book contains pictures and illustrations. Here, the two modes of language and image are explicitly combined. And a website, which may combine language, image, and sound, is even more explicitly multimodal. So it's certainly important that English studies encompasses an understanding of inherently multimodal texts, as such an understanding challenges the primacy and exclusivity often accorded to language, and because digital resources now enable written texts to be produced with a myriad of visual effects. But the ubiquitous presence of explicitly co-configured multimodal texts dramatically changes the landscape of communication in our contemporary world. And the study of such texts must be of central concern to English language studies, and of course to all language studies. As Kress and von Loen write, a past and still existent common sense to the effect that meaning resides in language alone, or in other versions of this, that language is the central means of representing and communicating, is simply no longer tenable, that it never really was, and certainly is not now. And that, we should note, was written 20 years ago, and even more has changed since then. So multimodality is not a new phenomenon, but it is somewhat new as a term or a conceptual terrain. And it is defined by van Loen as a field of study investigating the common as well as the distinct properties of the different modes in the multimodal mix and the way they integrate in multimodal texts and communicative events. It's related to the terms multimedia and new media, but it is not confined to digital texts. Interest in multimodality as a field of study is due in large part to the foundational work of Kress and von Loen in such books as Reading Images, The Grammar of Visual Design, and Multimodal Discourse, The Modes and Media of Contemporary Communication. And I know that a lot of you here will be very familiar with this background. In Reading Images, they outline a grammar for the analysis of images, and in Multimodal Discourse, they outline common semiotic principles which underlie all multimodal texts. Their approach is one of social semiotics, that is, an understanding of meaning-making deeply embedded within an understanding of the social, which combines an exploration of semiotic resources with an understanding of the communicative practices in which these resources are used. And it is strongly influenced, of course, by the work of Michael Halliday in systemic functional linguistics and social semiotics. The work, I'll just go on. This work by Halliday, many other scholars following his work, and by Kress and von Loen and scholars following their work, has been widely applied to all sorts of contemporary texts, some of which would be familiar in English studies and some of which, such as hairstyles, for example, perhaps not commonly studied as a communicative text. My own work in the built environment is very strange for many linguists and communication analysts to consider as a form of communication. But I feel very strongly that even the built environment communicates with us and to us. But the most important application to discuss for today is its application in education, the most researched area of application for social semiotics and multimodality. And this, of course, started with the New London Group and their work in multiliteracies. And particularly the work of Günter Kress showed that learning to communicate, to participate in society and culture is not just a matter of learning language. Teachers need to attend to all the modalities and recognize their students' agency in the process of text creation. So in the book Reading Images, The Grammar of Visual Design, Kress and von Loen draw attention to the importance of the visual in contemporary society and the importance of understanding the visual. They say visual compositions are not, despite assumptions to the contrary, transparent and universally understood. And they say that analysing visual communication is or should be an important part of the critical disciplines. Importantly, explicit knowledge about the visual mode and other modes is now being incorporated in school curricula in Australia. John Callow notes that in Australia, visual literacy is integrated in all literacy syllabus documentation across states and territories. This inclusion recognises that students need to develop new literacy skills, multiliteracies, in order for them to negotiate the growing number of texts that populate their home and school lives. So throughout the syllabus for students from the first years of school to the last years of school, we see that the curriculum now incorporates multiliteracies. For senior English, which is the last 2 years of school, the syllabus includes that students be adept in creating, transforming and adapting oral, written and multimodal texts in a range of mediums and styles. And those kinds of requirements are embedded throughout the different levels of schooling. While English language studies are not confined to literary subject English, it is here in particular where language skills are emphasised most strongly and where the subject content is, at least in part, the textual products themselves. And that now necessarily includes multimodal texts. So I should say that in Australia, if you study English, you're actually rarely studying English language. It usually means English literature, poetry, drama, and it now includes film and other multimedia texts. So It is nevertheless the case that in the study of English in a country like Australia, where there isn't much attention to language, we still need to engage teachers in effective education about multimodal texts. They need to be provided with appropriate resources for the level of student that they are teaching and meaningful assessment practices in order to succeed. And the knowledge base that teachers work with needs to be underpinned by strong grammars of multimodal resources. Particular emphasis needs to be placed on issues of critical literacy, and this means moving beyond basic reproduction and recognition literacies towards literacy which enables reflection, that is, an understanding that all social practices and hence all literacies are socially constructed, and the ability to read the practices of inclusion and exclusion which are necessarily entailed in such social construction, to quote Unsworth again. So we need to develop a critical literacy for understanding these kinds of texts. These texts make meaning, and we need to understand how they do this. So we need to rethink English or any language as being multimodal. How do we do this? Some of the key things, just a few, that we need to investigate multimodal resources, as Kress and von Loen have done in their book, Reading Images, trying to pull apart the mostly two-dimensional and static images of our visual world and show us what resources make up these texts and how these resources make meaning. So rethinking English language studies in the context of multimodality requires some fundamental shifts in perspective. So we need to give attention to all these kinds of resources. Kress and von Loen's approach to visual communication is that of social semiotics. Again, I know that many of you here will be very familiar with this. So semiosis, of course, refers to the making of meaning, semiotics to the study of meaning making, and social semiotics is the study of meaning making in its social context, which sounds like a very simple statement, but it's actually extremely important and has fundamental implications for the approach. Kress and von Loen elaborate that their approach to communication starts from a social base. In our view, the meanings expressed by speakers, writers, printmakers, photographers, designers, painters, and sculptors are first and foremost social meanings. That is not to deny the effect and importance of individual differences, given that societies are not homogenous, but composed of groups with varying and often contradictory interests. The messages produced by individuals will reflect the differences, incongruities, and clashes which characterize social life. So in Kress and von Loen's approach to visual images, so visual analysis, they adopt Halliday's metafunctional approach to meaning. So there are three primary areas of meaning which co-occur in any text, be it written or spoken language, something visual, a website, or in my opinion, a building. Okay. So the first of these is representational meaning, ideational in Halliday's terms. This is about what is there, what is depicted, what things are depicted. Are there any actions going on, relations about or between interactants? What is the context? So my image here is an advertisement from the 1920s for Palmolive soap. And we can see there is a lot of language in this advertisement. So language is still extremely important, but also a lot of illustration and a lot of design in the typography and so on. So we want to identify what's going on here, what we can see. So we do need to read the language. It's too small for you to read there, but it is extremely interesting. But we can also see in the illustrations, we have a man and a woman there. They seem to be elegant and in evening dress. They don't seem to be doing much, maybe just standing there. On the bottom left is a little drawing that is Cleopatra surrounded by her attendants. And we have the soap and the price on the bottom right-hand corner. So we can see there's something going on here about the soap, a man being proud of his wife, and some connection with historical special context. That's not an analysis, really, that's just a description. But that's what we're trying to get at with representational meaning. At the same time, so not supplanting that, but working with it, we have interactional or interpersonal meaning. So here we are concerned with how that which is depicted engages the reader or the viewer. So what relation is constructed between viewer and viewed? What attitudes are implied? For example, does the image make a strong, direct connection with the viewer, or is it more removed? And how is that established? So we can see here that the woman is looking directly at the viewer. The man is perhaps looking at us or perhaps looking over the shoulder of his wife. That directionality is not that clear. But there seems to be a strong engagement with the woman here, whereas we are observing the illustration at the bottom and the picture of the soap. And it would also seem through the typography, the elegant dress of the man and woman, and the sort of special status accorded to the historical context that we are meant to be viewing all this positively. The third area of meaning is compositional or textual, and this is about how the components of the image are arranged. What is the balance of image and verbiage, for example? Where on the page are components placed? What is highlighted or what stands out? So we can see that the language here takes up a lot of space and is very important. It's clear that we are meant to read the language, but the images surround the language and perhaps are all connected to it in some way. To my mind, the title "Proud of His Wife" stands out through its sort of typography and large size relative to the other writing, and the image of the man and woman stands out to me quite a lot as well. It's possible that different things might stand out to different viewers for slightly different reasons. But these are the kinds of questions that we ask about visual communication. And if we do some comparison with another similar but slightly different text, we see how some of these things change. So in a more modern ad for Palmolive products, a shampoo in this case, and this is from the 1980s, we see not a man and a woman, but just a woman. She's not just standing there. She seems to be turning or dancing. Her hair is flowing. There are these flowers overlaid on her in some way. Interpersonally, we are observing the woman. She's not looking at us. She's not paying attention to us. And compositionally, while there is important elements of language at the top and the bottom, the image and the visual nature of this page has really taken over in terms of communication. Not that the language does not contribute, it certainly does, but we really need to take account the visual here for what it is telling us. So these metafunctional meanings occur at the same time. In analysis, we pull them apart to see what is unique about each of them, but inevitably they end up going together. So they're always interwoven in the one text, like the braids of hair. So rethinking English as being multimodal. Another thing that changes is the nature of reading patterns because of the differences in the new modes of production. So this is just one thing that has fundamentally changed. In cultures which have writing that goes from left to right and from top to bottom, a linear reading pattern predominates, also moving from left to right and top to bottom. But if the page is, say, a 2-page spread in a school textbook, with various images and paragraphs scattered around it, a linear reading path may well be quite unsuitable. And indeed, the resource of layout takes on new significance in terms of understanding how the parts of the text relate to the whole. And if we go to a contemporary website, you know, a linear reading path describes only fragments of this text. How does the whole text go together? Where does our attention go? And how are learners and users of these texts supposed to make sense of them? Exley and Cottrell in 2012 note that seemingly simple and short multimodal texts make exceedingly complex reading demands of their readers. So layout and design may effectively support a reader's capacity to identify important information, or it may not. And such understandings must be part of teaching and understanding relevant literacy practices. Mills and Unsworth note that the online environment can be a challenging landscape for readers who must make use of self-regulation and persistence to avoid the cognitive overload and disorientation experienced by an endless sea of hyperlinked reading pathways. They must engage in active decision-making processes, engaging in prediction of partially obscured web content that is hidden behind navigational links. Online reading requires careful planning, monitoring, predicting, and questioning, and involves moving speedily and efficiently by skimming and summarizing valid findings. And I'm always reminded when my son was in primary school and a friend of his, they were aged around 8 or 9 at the time, was doing his homework and said to his mum, "I looked on the whole internet for his project on geography and there's nothing there." Okay, so this shows how challenging it is to assume that these hyperlinked and multimodal texts are easy to access and transparent. They are not. We have to learn how they make meaning. Another kind of difference is the evolving genres and changes in genres. And I have some examples of news there, but I'm just going to skip over that and move on a little bit. So in the classroom, a real challenge in any classroom, whatever the age, is dealing with complex texts in short spaces of time and balancing the detail of analysis with the capacity to achieve some interpretation. You simply can't analyze everything. I face this challenge at the university level in teaching visual communication, which is a second-year university course for students from media, general arts, including English and film, fine arts and design arts. And we use Cressum von Leeuwen's Reading Images as our textbook. So I just want to illustrate one example of how we approach one of the meta functions, the ideational or representational meaning. So this is the function of representing the world around and inside us, and the function of constructing representations of the world. I'm going to show excerpts of 2 brief videos here. I won't show the whole thing. I should warn you, the first one is extremely loud when it starts, so you might want to turn your volume down for a moment. And if it doesn't work, then Francisco is going to interrupt me.
Check 1, right to the sun. Right to the sun.
I think you've probably seen enough of that one to get what we say is the gist. It goes on forever. The music is the same on repeat, and we have the repetition of these kinds of images. Okay, and I should have introduced this by saying these are advertisements to recruit people into the Australian Defence Forces, and that first one was from the 1990s. And now I'm going to show you one from 2013 with the same purpose of recruiting people to join the armed forces.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Australian Defence Force Academy.
From the inside out, oh well, you take me along.
Okay, I wanted to show all of that video because, as you can see, there is an end point to it. And obviously, in both of those, plenty of resources for the making of those two videos. So just looking at the representational meta function and how we do that. So we consider what is there, what's denoted and what's connoted, and using Crescent von Leeuwen's model, differentiate the different process types. So they make a basic distinction between narrative and conceptual processes. So again, some of you will know this very well. Perhaps for others it will be new. So forgive me if I don't have the level quite right, but I'll just try and introduce it. So they describe a basic distinction in visual grammar. The first type of process are the narrative ones, which are realized by visible dynamic vectors. So all we see here are pixels on a screen, but it tells us that the person is moving. You know, we see all these vectors which show a lot of movement here, and an invisible vector indicating the process of looking. And this contrasts with more static or conceptual images where there are no such vectors. So it's just still. So we're looking at it for what it is, what its attributes are, and so on. So we have this basic distinction to begin with between narrative processes with the presence of a vector and conceptual processes with no visible vector there. And the systemic descriptions become much more complex and go into different kinds of processes. I won't go into all those details today. And we also have different kinds of conceptual processes as well. And for both types of process, then we can also have circumstances such as the setting or the location telling us where a particular event or action is taking place. So in the first video, the loud 1990s one, if we have a look at what's going on there, virtually every frame of that video has a vector or vectors in it indicating narrative processes of some kind. They're mostly action processes, things happening, and there's also quite a lot of reaction, which is Crescent von Leeuwen's term for looking. Visual processes are called, seeing and looking are called a reaction process. It doesn't mean responding to things. There are a few verbal processes, people are counting down to a shot or talking on the phone, but they don't have a very big role to play. So who or what is doing all of these active processes? Many of the participants are inanimate. So there's boats and planes and tanks, and it's as if they are autonomous and being driven by themselves. It's as if these machines are doing the actions. When we do see people, they're mostly singular individuals, mostly male. There's a few shots which has people in teams and a very small number of shots including women. And where the women are included in the shot, they are only in the reaction or looking processes and verbal processes. They're not involved in action processes. Also, an important point to note is that the participants, even when they are in the shot as an individual, they're homogenized. So it's not about specific individuals and they're not identified in any individual way. And they are essentialized, presented in terms of standard attributes such as a uniform. So they're just soldiers or Navy personnel. In the action processes, when an action is actually being done, it's possible that it may be intransitive, so the action is not extended to anyone else, or transitive, where there is a goal or a phenomenon, okay? So an object. So many of the processes in this particular film are non-transactional, non-transitive. So there is no goal or there's no phenomenon. So the plane is flying, man is jumping out of the plane. Some of them have an implied goal. So we can see in the bottom two shots here that a gun is being aimed at something, but we don't see what the actual goal is. And we have circumstances of location in place, on land, in sky, on the water, even under the water, but there's no specific geographical location. We don't know where any of this is. And it's generalized time during the day or night, but not specific. And moving from grammar to discourse and considering the video as a whole, there's no narrative arc to that video. It is a presentation of individual vignettes, which are just kind of stuck together, and each is as important as the other. And that's why I stopped it early, because once you've seen, you know, a minute, you've more or less seen it all. In the second video, it's quite different, as you will have noticed. So it does have still many narrative action processes, but these are either non-transactional, so there's no goal, so they're just walking, or if they are transactional, the goal is inanimate and inconsequential. So they might be turning over the tire or eating some pizza. So not very consequential in terms of the real conditions of the army. There are also behavioural processes, which are sort of somewhat in between action and material and mental processes in Halliday's framework. So we see the people in the video learning and studying, and also verbal processes of talking to each other. Very importantly, in this video, there are many conceptual processes. The top two images here show symbolic, attributive processes. So this is where we're looking at the image for what it represents. And on the left, we have a man putting a hat on another man, okay? And yes, that is a kind of a narrative, so there is some action there, but it is symbolizing the moment of this boy taking on the uniform. So this is a symbolic moment. On the right there, we have another of the candidates, the students, putting on the graduation gown. So there is a little bit of narrative there, but in conceptual terms, it's symbolizing the end of their studies. In the bottom images, we have other conceptual processes of classification. We can see teams here arranged symmetrically, showing that the individuals are part of a larger group. And these kinds of conceptual processes occur throughout the video. We also see that even though team membership is shown, that the participants are individuated. You may have noticed that there are 2 males and 1 female who are tracked throughout the video, and they participate in collective behaviours at different times, but they're also seen to be individuals with their own room, their own activities, and so on. I'm just showing one of them in different ways that he is tracked through the video there. Across the whole video, each of these individuals can be seen to engage in a conversion process. The individuals transform through their learning and bonding activities, their behaviour, appearance, and possessions transform as well. So again, I'll just track one of them through, who's shown to gradually transform her bedroom from an empty nothingness to her own place. And in terms of discourse, there is a strong narrative arc to this video. It is a story of transformation from ordinary, everyday people to qualified, functioning members of the force. All right, won't do that one. So overall, we see 2 contrasting worlds. The first is a world of action and machines, of all the processes of real-world war with none of the consequences. Participation here is participating in the excitement or the challenge. The second is a world of measured transformation, from the civilian world to the world of the professional armed services, a world which balances collective and individual identity, which provides a safe haven for learning, and where participation is the process of taking on new attributes aligned with the new culture. So maybe we could come to that conclusion just by doing a close reading. Watch the videos carefully. If you understand the culture, you will get those key points. You don't need a detailed technical analysis to do that. And In many respects, what I've just presented is a close reading, but it's a close reading facilitated by explicit analytical tools. It does not depend on the gift of insight. It does not depend on knowing what the important details are in advance. By applying the analytical tools, identifying the different process types, for example, and the different participant roles, we can draw out these meanings. So the point is that this approach does not assume that everyone shares the literacy resources needed to read these texts, but rather it argues that providing everyone with explicit tools will help all reach a higher level of critical literacy. And it's interesting that my students at university, they're all engaged in the digital world. They're all extremely competent and much more competent than I am with digital media, but they miss a lot of what goes on in contemporary media texts. So in my own teaching, I follow a strategy which first of all, goes through a number of different phases. So we first of all observe and describe and just say, well, what did we think about the text? What's going on there? Then we go back into the text and technicalize it a little bit. Find the core parts of the grammar, the major things that are happening, the key process types, for example. Then we go back and do another layer of analysis, looking for more delicate options. So if we know the process type, then what's happening with the participant roles, for example? And we try and bring it together in terms of the patterns that are foregrounded or highlighted across the text as a whole, highlighted either in relation to the grammar, the patterns of the whole text, or in comparison with other texts. So there are different roles for the students to play in this teaching model, different roles for the teacher, and we might think about it in terms of focus questions at different points, and that's only in relation to ideational meaning. More simply, we can put it this way. What kinds of meanings does this text make? Whatever text it is that you are looking at, be it, TikTok, as Francisco said at the beginning, or a video, or a website, or a contemporary textbook with language and images in print. So we want to ask, in terms of the meta function, what view of the world does it construe? Also, how are we positioned to view it? And how does the text hold together? So we ask how these meanings are made and through what resources. And we ask, what does this say about the social values represented in the text, its makers and its users? So the aim is not to provide a correct reading, but a convincing reading based on explicit visual analysis, on the identification of patterns, and on critical reflection on the significance of those patterns for the meanings of the text and for meanings of context and culture. So we aim to scaffold students from analysis to interpretation and understanding. So multimodal English and multimodal any language has to be about today's communication. That does not mean that we ignore the past and pretend that language does not matter. Our language today is a product of what has come before, and we may not have time to study everything, but of course we can bring history with us and use that to help us understand today. We really need to understand modes beyond language itself, because communication has always been about more than language. And now we really see that that is extremely important because of the changes in technology, which make these resources available to more people and which technology requires us to engage with these resources every day. We need to be reading multimodal texts, and by that I mean analysing, understanding and critiquing them, as well as producing them. And we need to develop analytical and critical tools that cross modes. So in my course at university, we may look at still images, we may look at videos, I may ask them to think about hairstyles and buildings as well, because the fundamental principles can cross modes. We're always talking about relating textual resources to meaning and to social and cultural context. I believe it's a very important enterprise for theorists, analysts, and teachers of today. And I hope that you have been able to see something of my approach today. Thank you very much for being here. And I'll stop sharing there. Thank you.
Okay, you're back. Now you can see us again.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very, very much, Louise, for this amazing talk and sort of guiding us through a little bit of visual grammar and thinking about how we can apply this to the teaching of English, to the classroom, the new challenges of multimedia of contemporary society. So now we have some time for questions. So to the audience, I'm very happy we have over 100 people today, so this is very good. I would like to point out Professor Viviane Eberly is here today. I saw her, so you can say hi to Viviane.
Hi, Viviane.
Yes, Viviane was the person who introduced me to multimodality. She's one of the first people to work with multimodality in Brazil. She was far ahead from me, but I've learned from her a lot. Thank you, Viviane, for being here. I have also some colleagues from UFAC, from UFAC, Dr. Keila Lopes, Ms. Raquel Ishii. Also, they work in our faculty. So thank you very much for being here today. And these people from all over the place. We have people from all over the country. So this is very good. So this is time for questions. So the audience, you can post your questions on the chat and then I can read. Well, can you read the chat as well now, Louise?
Yes, I can. And
okay.
I just have to ask, is that Ana Cristina that came with me to the Museum of Language in Sao Paulo? Ana Cristina Almeida Evangelista, is that you? Or was that another name? Anyway,
Ana
go
Cristina,
on.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay, because you went to the Museum of the Portuguese Language with someone, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so guys, we have some time for questions. So the floor is open for you guys to interact with Louise. Yes, questions? People need type for typing. I want to start then with the questions while people think about their questions, their own questions, and have time to type in. Because one of we have communication is changing very fast. Because we work a lot with emails, we are dinosaurs. But also people who still use Facebook, they are already dinosaurs, right? And very soon TikTok will be history. So how do you think are the challenges and how do we address them sort of in the long term regarding the teaching of English? And how do you think also the use of technology in the classroom? What is the experience in Australia in terms of bringing multimodality into the curriculum and then bringing this into the classroom in real life?
Yeah, it is a big challenge. Keeping up with the students and what they're doing is probably the biggest challenge. Yeah. So yes, we have looked at TikTok a little bit in the classroom, and I always ask students to bring in their own texts. And I open it up to them, and they always bring in the most interesting examples and the most challenging ones. That's a little bit harder to do if you're teaching at primary school or junior secondary school, but it's still worthwhile. I think each new form, be it, like it's Facebook, it's Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, whatever's next. They are drawing on the same resources. language, image, movement, and so on. They each have their own affordances, as Chris has talked about it, in terms of gains and losses. So, you know, TikTok is particularly useful for showing movement. Yeah, it's about dancing and doing silly things. Yeah. So as well as seeing what has come along and what is still there, then we need to talk about what's highlighted or unique in that particular platform. Even though it might be, you know, what might be a continuous resource that's used like language, what's changed in the language. So one of the examples I skipped over was about changes in the presentation of news. Yeah, from in print news, we have a fairly formal stories structured around the headline and the lead and paragraphs underneath that and so on. On the website of the same news media, we might get a little bite, little print, which asks a question like, feeling too rushed about Christmas, you know, like it's still language, but it's the nature of the language is quite changed. It's become personal, informal, elliptical, and so on. So we need to look at what stays the same, what's changed, and what's kind of unique or particular about the new platform, and also what's gone, what's missing. Yeah. So a lot of scholars have talked about the affordances, the gains and losses, shifts, and so on. So when we use PowerPoint and have bullet lists, this changes the nature of written argumentation. It's very different from an academic article, for example. So, yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. However, in terms of technology, you can understand multimodality with very simple technological tools. Okay, so there's a PhD student who recently graduated from South Africa, Christine Price, who teaches landscape architecture at university. Now, working in South Africa is a challenging social, cultural context because there are a lot of students who come to university from non-traditional backgrounds, and they don't have the material resources to make nice, neat models that are required in traditional teaching of architecture and landscape design. And Christine has found a way to use ordinary objects and show the students how to make use of them multimodally and to analyze them multimodally with very little or no technology at all. So it is possible to do quite a lot without being required to have, you know, whiz-bang tools. Yeah, so we also shouldn't be sort of foxed by the technology. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The next question is from Bianca. Is it possible to tell semiotics and multimodality apart as two distinct sciences?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, Bianca. No, they're part of the same enterprise and also slightly separate. So semiotics has numerous branches, as you would know. You know, we have the sort of structuralist French semiotics, the American semiotics following Peirce, the social semiotics, and so on. So they are different schools and have different interests. I think all semioticians today engage with multimodal texts. Probably when I use multimodality, I'm using it as a synonym for a social semiotic approach to multimodality. But there are other ways of studying multimodality using other theoretical frameworks as well. So I don't propose this as the only framework, but as one, which you may use as a tool in your toolkit.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Better go for the educational process you put forward, so better understanding of the word. How do you deal with the ideological aspects of text which are predominantly implicit? So we are moving towards discourse.
Yeah, well, I think that's really important. And it's by having explicit tools for analysis to really pull texts apart, that tells you what's been made implicit in the text. So in my videos from the Defence Forces, the first one, you know, now our knowledge and understanding of gender relations has moved on since the 1990s, we can immediately see that it's about men and men doing manly stuff. But certainly in the 1990s, that may not have stood out. That would perhaps be seen as, well, of course, if you're in the army, that's what you do. You're a man, you go to the army, you jump out of planes and you shoot things. But in fact, that kind of view of the world is implicit, you know, and understanding ideology is about bringing it out and making the implicit explicit. So I think that's an extremely important part of this enterprise. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next. Cristiane Pimentel, thank you. How multimodality studies can help us to understand the phenomenon of fake news? That's challenging. We need that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Yes, well, one of the reasons fake news is so successful is because it very effectively imitates real news. Yeah, it looks like real news because visual editing techniques are so sophisticated now. You can't see when one person's head has been imposed on another's body or anything like that. It's absolutely seamless. And we even have the phenomenon of deep fakes today, where they can use computer modeling to make one human move and sound and look like another. So fake news is a really serious issue. I think multimodality in itself needs complementary tools to get at what's happening in very, very clever fake news. So we need to teach our students about being critical about the kinds of meanings that are being expressed through fake news and questioning the sources of where they have come from. I have colleagues at the University of New South Wales who are looking at fake news in particular, and the sorts of verbal and visual strategies that are typically used by the key influencers on fake news to make their message sound convincing and to make their message appeal to their audience. So one visual strategy, for example, is where they use a screenshot from a news video, for example, and that's provided as evidence of their points of view. So they use a range of visual strategies and a range of verbal strategies to make their comments convincing. But yeah, that's a really critical issue for contemporary society and something that we could all be working on a lot more.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Next, we have another question from Rogério de Mendonça Correia. Nice speech. Nice talk, Professor Ravelli. Thank you. Is it possible to connect multimodality with critical discourse analysis concerning to its critical content?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would definitely bring in aspects of critical discourse analysis, and there are critical discourse analysts who would use aspects of multimodality. So I think they complement each other very nicely. There are no two models that work 100% together, and there will always be some differences, but I think they definitely complement each other. And the sort of the critical agenda of critical discourse analysis is a very important component related to the earlier question of ideology and even about fake news. Fake news is about understanding fake news is about being critical of fake news. So that's a really important part. And I think that's what I'm trying to do in my teaching at university, is to make my students more critical of the media that they consume and produce.
Exactly. Okay, thank you, Louise. Thank you. Any other questions? I think you're running out of questions. Okay, so I think this is a wrap up. We at UFAC would like to thank you for your availability, for being here today, for your availability yesterday to test the equipment. Well, that was Monday for you. It was Sunday for us, but it was fun to see you on Sunday. So thank you very, very much, Louise. And we hope to see you again, to have you here with us perhaps someday physically, so we can take you around into the forest, to the border with Bolivia, and try some interesting food. We have plenty of that. So thank you very much for being here with us. The audience was just absolutely fantastic, amazing, as Dai would say. So it's really good to have you here, guys. Thank you very much. So we have 5 talks ahead of us. Louise was the first one. It's like having one talk for each decade of the English language and literature course, the Letras program. So we hope to see you again tomorrow. We have a talk by Dr. Daniel Ferraz from the University of São Paulo. He will be talking about writing. So we are going to email you all to remind you. And thank you very, very much, Louise. Once again, it was a great pleasure to see you and hear you again. It was just fabulous. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and good luck for the rest of the week. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. You were a great audience. Thank you. Bye-bye, Louise.